Greetings, it's Gabe Morales with Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians. Today we have a very special guest. He's going to be talking to us a little bit about different things throughout his law enforcement career. Darren Ullmann retired from the Cowlitz County Sheriff's Office. For those of you not familiar with Pacific Northwest, that's located in between Seattle and Portland, basically. Very nice country out there. I've been through there many times. And he worked there for over 20 years, and he was assigned to a variety of positions there. He worked in the street crimes unit. He worked as an undercover officer. He then was put in charge as commander of the narcotics task force in the area, and then retired as Undersheriff, Cowlitz County. He has done a great deal of public speaking, and he goes around the Pacific Northwest and other parts of the country, talks to groups and schools, educators, law enforcement, basically everybody that he can communicate with in regards to the issues that we face currently with the criminal justice system, as far as reforms that have been suggested by many people. However, it's very easy to criticize. It's a lot harder to come up with better solutions to improve the system, things that'll actually work, long-lasting things. Department of Justice has many cities now that are under oversight, and that hasn't really gone over too well in most cities for a variety of reasons, and we'll get into that a little bit. He also talks about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, with officers. Darren is going to talk a little bit about that today. How are you, sir?
I'm well. How are you?
All right, so we're going to get right into it here. How do you see the drug war today, sir? How are our communities being affected? How can we improve the situation as far as the drug war?
Well, thanks for having me here. I appreciate the time. I can tell you that the drug war hasn't worked. I mean, here we are 50 years later, and what it's all become is a supply and demand for the cartels in Mexico and other places. And, drugs are coming from China. They're coming from all over the place. But the problem is that we have such a high consumer market for drugs that we're not going to stop the flow coming in. It's just not. We've proven after 50 years that we can't stop it. So what this is doing is it's just, number one, financially, it's killing our country. I mean, the amount of money that we spend on the DEA, the Department of Justice, and all these federal agencies that are doing nothing but fighting drugs, it's getting nowhere. If we could convert some of that money into a more logical solution, which really comes down to the addiction issues that we have. If we stop the demand, we're going to stop the supply. But right now, we are focused on the supply while the demand is higher than it's ever been. And especially now after COVID, we have so many people that are struggling just to survive, and they've lost jobs or they've left jobs. The stressors are there. And this whole next generation of kids that are coming up are living this stress. And this is a big piece of what causes people to go into drug use and to self-medicate. So if we can get to that underlying cause, which is the addiction of these ridiculous drugs that these pharmaceutical companies have produced, that's where we're going to be successful. But as long as we keep trying to put a Band-Aid over this, sucking chest wound, it's not going to work. And we've proven it time and time again. We've wasted millions and millions of dollars. How many lives have been lost? Both the users who have overdosed to law enforcement agents who have been killed in the line of duty. At some point, you would think that we would wise up and realize, hey, maybe this isn't working right. Maybe we should find another alternative, because right now it isn't working and we're struggling worse than we ever have.
I understand. Does treatment work? Is it better just to lock them up? Is it better to send them to treatment?
Counseling and treatment will work, but you have to understand that the person has to be ready to accept it, because you can't just throw someone into counseling and to treatment and expect it to work, because it's not going to, unless they are ready, unless they have gotten to that point in their life where it's time. And it could be going to jail that causes them to be in that situation. Although we've seen, and you've seen many times, that that's not necessarily the case, because they come back and they can get the drugs while they're in jail half the time. So that's a struggle. What we're looking at is this perpetuation of generations of kids who are growing up in these environments that don't know that this isn't normal. So you have kids that are growing up with mom on the couch with a needle hanging out of her neck, and they don't know that that's not normal. So if we can break that cycle, if we can break these kids away from seeing this and living these experiences, then we're going to have much greater success. Now, as far as getting them, because once they're damaged, and it's just a matter of dealing with the damage down the road. But again, when we talk about treatment and getting people into treatment, the first step is that getting them there. The second step is them willing to accept it and to do it. And once they've come to that realization, it works. But then what we see is people will go to treatment, then they'll come right back to the community where they just went through all this, and they fall right back into the same thing. And the reason for that is because they've been arrested so many times, they can't find a job. They don't have any resources to help them do anything. They can't find housing because no one will even rent to a convicted felon. So what happens is they get to the point and they're like, what else am I going to do? What the hell? I'm going to get high. I mean, that's the way they deal with the pain. They deal with the ramifications of everything that's happened to them up to that point. And that's where the mass incarcerations aren't necessarily the answer. We have to find ways of breaking that cycle and breaking this system that we've been working under, because I don't know, do the same thing over again and over and over without realizing, hey, maybe it's us. Maybe it's the system that isn't working, that isn't correcting this problem. I don't have the silver bullet. I don't have that perfect answer as to how we fix it, because nobody knows. If somebody knew, they would do it. So we have to try things. We have to be willing to step out and try something we haven't tried before. Because if we don't do that, we're just going to continue down this road. We continue with this cycle of violence, this cycle of drug use, and it's not going to stop. Our system, the jails are overfull. Our judicial system is totally maxed out. There's just no time and money to continue with the fight the way we're fighting. It's the system everywhere. You talk to cops anywhere, and you're going to find out it's pretty much the same thing. We're doing it. We arrest this guy. He goes to jail. He gets out. He does it again. We arrest him again. It's the same people time and time again. We're stuck in a cycle that we can't seem to figure out how to break. To me, we have to get to the core cause of the cycle and break it at the base. We have to get down to the root and dig that root out and fix it from there to move forward. Without doing that, we're just going to keep same situation we've been in.
Well, I know there's been a lot of criticism of the criminal justice system, and in particular in regards to the war on drugs, that incarcerated more people than anywhere else in the world here in the United States. And we have seen that, that didn't work too well. Then we had very overcrowded system, as you said. Then we had COVID. After all this talk of criminal justice reform, I think COVID did more to empty our jails and prisons than any reform. They found all kinds of guys, they've been doing life without, and, the guy's 80 years old and has had no major behavior problems in jail and prison, but he had this sentence that said he had no out date, and they just changed the rules, basically. They started cleaning out our jails and prisons. So I agree with you that we were maxed out capacity. However, now recently, there's been some criticism, in particular in regards to the juvenile system, that we've been too lenient, especially dealing with these kids that aren't going to learn, if they keep on getting put on, triple, quadruple probation, and there's no repercussions, I'm saying, for their behavior. So what is the situation there? How can we improve that?
That's a difficult one, because I never worked in the juvenile justice system, although my son is an educator at our juvenile justice center here locally. And these kids are the most disrespectful, just difficult to deal with people that you can ever imagine, because they have no boundaries. They have no perception on what normal behavior is. Again, it comes back to that root cause. And our system is trying to put the control in the parents' hands. And I think that's where we're missing a step, because these same parents are the ones that raised these knuckleheads in the first place. And so that's what makes it difficult to put that demand on this parent who's already dysfunctional in the first place, expecting them to correct what they've already screwed up. That's not going to work. Again, I don't have the answer to it, but I think we do need to be a little bit stiffer on our penalties for these children, or finding an alternative way of dealing with what they're doing. Because you're right. I mean, they go unchecked, and the penalties just aren't there. And so getting to that root cause is what we have to do at some point. So with the juvenile system, I don't have enough experience in it to really give you a good measured response. So
That's fine. That's an honest answer. I respect that. And hopefully we'll have some juvenile justice folks on here. Maybe they will come up with some answers, because from what I've seen, what we're doing now is not working. As far as another thing that I saw happen in the last few years was not only that we had the war on drugs, but what a lot of people call war on cops. I mentioned the consent decrees on cities all over the United States by the DOJ. And there's been a lot of officers that probably, need to look for other work. Probably shouldn't have gotten this line of business in the first place. But we also have a lot of officers that I know that are really good people that have told me they are thinking about quitting because their morale is so low and they're so understaffed and they're pulling double duties back to back. They're getting, burned out. And I know you know about that with police officer burnout. Some of them, unfortunately, have taken their lives even. So this is real stuff that, we're low on officers and hard to hire newer officers these days. A lot of young people don't even want to get involved in the business because of the label that being a cop has. So it's kind of double-edged question there. So how can we better deal with the morale that officers are facing, and how can we better deal with that PTSD that a lot of them are facing?
So today is the 4-year anniversary of one of my deputies that was killed in the line of duty. He was ambushed. He was going on a routine call that he's been on a million times and was shot and killed as soon as he approached the car. That doesn't help morale. I can tell you right now. We have a very big issue with morale within law enforcement. And unfortunately, we are at a point to where we've become this us versus them mentality within law enforcement. With the whole rise that happened a few years ago with the riots in Seattle and in Portland and other cities, what we saw was this outpouring of hate to law enforcement. That isn't the reason why cops are stressed and the reason for the low morale, but that certainly didn't help it either. What that did, though, is it showed us that there's something wrong. There's something wrong with the way we're doing police work. And this was what really was an eye-opener for me, because I reached out to other agencies in the state at that time and said, hey, look, when we've got tens of thousands of people standing on the street saying defund the police, there's got to be a reason for that. People aren't going to gather for no reason to do that. They're angry about the way we're doing business. So maybe it's time that we stop and look within law enforcement as leaders in this field and try to figure out where it's broke, what's happening, and what can we do to fix it. A lot of it comes down to PTSD, and it comes down to this hypervigilance that we've created within law enforcement. And what we've done is, and I remember when I went to the academy 20-some years ago, we were told that you're always on duty. You are always on duty. Don't trust anybody. If you've got one gun, bring another gun. If you've got one knife, carry 2 knives. Always be prepared and always know that someone's out to get you. So you take that through your career, and that's why cops, when they go into restaurants, they sit against the walls. They don't want their back to the door. They don't want to take their family into certain places because of that. When I was working undercover, I had my wife and kids. They knew that if I disappeared in a grocery store, then there was a reason for that, because I spotted somebody that I didn't want to see with my family, or there was a thing to get away from. However, we've taken that to the next level. We've got guys who are so hypervigilant now that they don't associate with people outside of the cop world. We have these tight groups, and unfortunately, things like the thin blue line and the flag, I mean, that has now become a bad thing. I don't see it as a bad thing at all. To me, that is one cop showing another cop just, how we're proud of what we do. We work hard. We try to protect the public. We do everything we can to make people safe, but it's now being labeled as something bad, and that's horrible. That doesn't help morale.
I understand exactly where you're coming from. I deal with that all the time. That's something that even now when I go to public locations, sometimes I feel like right now, I just saw somebody come by. I mean, I do it. I need to know who's behind me, who's by me. That's something I don't think that ever leaves us. It's instilled
See,
in
that's
us. And as far as the thin blue line, yeah, we see it as there's very few of us. So we're here to watch each other's backs, watch each other's six, as we say. It is a slogan of camaraderie. But to the public,
yes.
a lot of them don't see it that way. They see that as, oh, that's your code of silence. The thin blue line means, shh, don't
Yeah.
say nothing when you see stuff going wrong. Cover it up.
Let me elaborate on that, because what we're talking about is what I was trying to say was this is the police culture that we've developed right now. This culture has become the us versus them culture because so much negativity has come in on us for being that way, that's what's causing a problem with our community relations. And we have these cops who now have become so sequestered in and they're so hyper vigilant, it's leading to massive burnout. And people are burning out way faster than they should be. We shouldn't have cops after 5 years. I'm done. I'm getting out of this. It's too much. It's because of that. It's because we're been trained and we've been fed to believe that we have to be constantly on duty. The thing is, we don't need cops to be on duty all the time. If there's an incident that's happening, it's okay to just be a good witness. You don't have to pull your gun and be involved with the takedown. There's so much value in a good witness who can articulate what they saw and what happened and who the bad guy was. We'll get the bad guy. We'll get him. If we don't get him right that minute, that's okay. And so we don't think of it that way. We think of, well, I'm there. If I don't do something now, then I'm going to be the bad guy and I'm going to be guilty for the rest of my life for not doing something right then. I say that in general terms. If you have a shooting that's happening and you're there and can take care of it, that's totally different. I'm just talking about regular going to dinner with your wife and things like that, because along with this burnout is we're losing officers hand over fist. They're leaving in droves. I know now they're starting to pick up on hiring again, but it's because of this. It's this police culture that we have. It's this machismo. Everyone's got the grunt style shirts on with the flags on the shoulders and they're too tight and they want to show, you know what I'm saying?
Decals on their trucks, the back of their trucks and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's got the flags on their hats. And, I'm all about being patriotic. I'm very patriotic.
Almost an under siege mentality.
Yes. We're not at war. We are not at war with the public. And that's today's with the tack vests that people are wearing. I mean, we look like we have combat soldiers going into, my kid's out of control call. We don't need to be policing that way. We're overdoing it. We're over policing our own communities. And another piece of that, and to go back to what you originally had talked about at the beginning of this question, was that burnout and the problems with these bigger cities. I think a big problem that we have too is the size of some of our police forces. Look at Seattle, look at New York, look at Chicago. New York, that's an army. That's not a police force, that's an army. So we have to look at that. If we look at the smaller communities, when the legislature goes in and starts changing all these laws, they're doing it based on what happens in these big cities. When the smaller communities like mine, where we have 60 people in my department, we're affected for actions that occurred in these massive jurisdictions where life is very different. We're not all the same. So I think if we took these larger agencies and broke them down into community-sized police agencies, yes, we would have more chiefs, but we would have more community control over those police agencies. They would be a better fit, they would be better matched, and take the size out of it. Take the army out of the policing. Because with these massive agencies, you can't control that. And that's where you see the cops going bad. At my agency, we don't have those problems. We don't have people going rogue and developing gangs within the police department and dealing drugs and stealing evidence. You don't see that because we're small enough that everybody knows everybody. Everyone knows what everyone's doing. But when you have 10,000 officers, you end up with way more administration. It's just a mess, and you can't control all of that. So I think it's another thing to look at as far as reform is maybe it's time we start looking at the size of some of these agencies and knock them down a notch. Take them down to make them all medium-sized agencies, and they could do it. It would take work, but I think you'd see a much better communication with the communities, and I think the communities would be more appreciative of that as well. But that's not to say that we don't still work together. We don't say there's a major incident or a riot in downtown Seattle, that all these other smaller agencies then can come together and work to help take care of that. Because you can do that right now with someone the size of Seattle. But just sitting as they are today, I think these agencies have gotten too big and too out of control.
Well, thank you for answering my questions, Darren. I really appreciate that. You work with Behind the Badge, correct? What does that involve?
So this weekend, I'm heading over to Spokane to help them facilitate a training for executive leadership in law enforcement. And what I do is I come in and I tell my story about our officer who was killed in the line of duty and the impact and the repercussions that occurs to an agency when that happens. It's a pretty powerful talk. It's pretty difficult for me to do because Justin's death was really a trigger for me, and it sent me and my PTSD off the edge. And that's what forced me to retire. I had to get out. I had to break away from the whole thing. And I spent about a year and a half going through therapy through the VA. Thank goodness I still have VA coverage from my time in combat. And so that was really helpful. So now I know what I'm dealing with, but it's important that agencies hear this and understand what can happen and that it can get to your executives. I mean, it's not just your guys on the line that get affected by PTSD. It could be your commanders sitting right next to you and you don't even realize it, and just how devastating it can be. So it's an important discussion that we have to have with law enforcement, and that they need to be very aware of PTSD and how damaging it can be, and it leads to the suicides, and it's something we've got to rein in and we've got to deal with. And this, again, comes back to the police culture. We've got to break away from this macho crap, and people need to look at each other as human beings, and that we need to take care of each other, and we need to work together to get through this and get rid of the stigmatizing effects of being, broken. I tell people regularly, I'm broken. There's no doubt. But I did what I had to do for myself, and I took care of myself, and now I'm doing great. And I'm happy to share my story with whoever wants to hear it. It's painful to do, but I know how important it is to hear it. So it's a good thing.
Well, I appreciate that, sir. Thank you very much again for coming on the show and sharing that with us.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Take care.